All right, great. So first and foremost, I want to thank you all for inviting me. And I didn't know anything about the ISA before I was invited a couple of months ago. I did a little research, and I found out what a great organization it is. So I joined my local chapter in Connecticut, where I'm from. So I'm one of the newest members, at least in Connecticut. Well, my name is John Waller, and I am the practice lead for cybersecurity at Synopsys, and I'm on the services side of things. All of my colleagues here are with the products, so it's a kind of a mix of what we do. As you probably know, Synopsys is the leader in application security testing across the industry, and we have a full range of testing tools. And as I said, I'm on the services side, so basically I do a lot of assessments, NIST CSF assessments, API security, so that's the kind of things that I do. So what I'd like to talk to you tonight about is API security. And I would just say this, is that it's great to see all of you here, especially with beers. That's something, I wish I had one right here, but I'll save that for afterwards. So let's go ahead and get started. Oh, let's try the other one. Great. So tonight I'm going to talk about the current state of API security. And what we've done is come up with a framework on how either organizations can do it themselves or use an organization like us to help you to get a mature API security program, phased approach. Phase 1 and Phase 2, where we basically, Phase 1 is we do a baseline. Phase 2 is we come up with the recommendations and how to optimize your APIs. So before I even go further in this, let me just ask, how many people really know about APIs and how important they are in our today's environment? So like most people, right? But the thing that kind of gets overlooked is that, and I'll just move on to our statistics here, that Salt Security is one of the leaders in API security, and they pretty much introduced the whole security for API years ago. They're one of the founders there. And what they've done is that on a year-to-year basis, they come up with the statistics. So basically, what they found is that API security incidents, together with 100, almost 200% doubling of API traffic last year, there was the same amount of security incidents that were realized. And in these numbers, just as there's an increase in traffic, we're going to have the increase of the incidents. And basically, the result is that there's not enough dedicated API security practices. And just some of the numbers, that about 2/3 of those respondents manage over 10 million API requests monthly, but only 7.5% of them have dedicated API testing and threat modeling programs. About 1/3 said that they had authentication issues or sensitive data exposure in production APIs last year. And only 21% believe that their existing security approaches are very effective at preventing API attacks. So knowing that this is a problem, basically what we have done is that we're working with customers for many years, and we've developed a framework for basically elevating the API security programs. And we really have a phased approach where we start with a current state assessment and a preliminary API inventory, and that really the objective is to conduct a thorough assessment of an organization's API security posture to identify the gaps and the areas of improvement. So again, the starting point is our API framework, and that's what we do our current state assessment against. And it's been built over the years. It's based on the OWASP API Security Top 10, various NIST standards, other industry benchmarks, and our own experience. And this framework is structured in 6 domains, which contain subdomains. If you're familiar at all with the structure of the NIST cybersecurity framework, that's kind of what we used as the basis for it. And once we're complete with the assessment, that this maturity assessment, it highlights the areas of strength, but most importantly, it identifies the critical gaps that need to be addressed. So those, basically, the framework itself, we're going to move from left to right. And I'll just sort of breeze through the domains, and then we're going to go into them individually. So we start off with the API inventory, move on to the development phase, next into the testing, of which obviously Synopsys tools play a big important part, and others, of course. Next, operations, response, incident response, and then finally, governance. So that these individual domains we're going to cover individually here. But as we go through this, basically the assessment we're going to is completed by doing stakeholder interviews to engage to gather insights into the current API security practices. This will allow us to identify challenges. Next, we review existing policies and procedures to assess the alignment with the API security framework. Once we're done, we perform a gap analysis to figure out where the gaps are in areas of improvement. And then finally, we document the findings with a detailed report outlining strengths, weaknesses, and preliminary recommendations for enhancing API security. So the first domain of the inventory, we basically start off, and again, let me just say this. It's important to note that even though the domains are sequential, we're evaluating the current state. So we're looking at everything at the same time. And as we're progressing through this framework, it's not like we're doing it one at a time. We're doing it all at the same time. So when we're looking at the domains and the subdomains, the first one about API inventory and discovery, it's really the main point is to understand what you have to protect. So in this stage, we really want to be able to identify and catalog all the active APIs within the organization, including shadow and undocumented APIs. It's important to use automated discovery tools to continuously scan the network and detect the APIs and maintain an up-to-date inventory. And then with each of those, we want to document each API's endpoint, the purpose, and the usage to provide a clear overview of the API landscape. And then next is the security catalog, so that once we have the inventory, we want to create this comprehensive catalog that includes security metadata for each API and include information like data sensitivity, authentication methods, and risk assessments. So this catalog helps to understand the security posture and the compliance status of each API. In the development, oh, there we go. In the next domain about development, we really have an initial focus on the design and development phase, so that we want to make sure that the security is integrated into the API's lifecycle from the beginning by implementing secure coding practices and design principles. We want to conduct those security reviews and threat modeling to identify potential risk early in the development process. The next subdomain under development is threat modeling and risk assessment, so that we want to identify those potential threats and vulnerabilities specific to APIs through regular threat modeling sessions, and use tools to automate and streamline the threat modeling process wherever possible. And lastly, version control. We want to manage changes to the API code and have machine-readable documentation, and that configurations are secure by implementing version control like Git to track changes, enforce code reviews, and ensure that all code changes are logged and auditable. And of course, I'd be with Synopsys. This is really our bread and butter, the testing. The first and foremost is the security testing in the CI/CD pipeline. So we want to validate the security of APIs throughout with rigorous testing using automated and manual testing methods, including SAST, DAST, IAST. We have our Seeker tool. I was just speaking with our engineering team, and our Seeker tool is great for API testing just before pre-production. And then at runtime protection. You do all this to identify vulnerabilities. And then we really want to regularly update those tests to cover new threats and ensure comprehensive coverage. A next aspect of this domain is vulnerability management and patching. We want to make sure to continuously identify and remediate vulnerabilities that are identified by establishing a vulnerability management program that prioritizes patching based on risk levels, and using tools to automate the vulnerability scanning and tracking is critical there. And something that's often overlooked is third-party API security. Using APIs is a great way to be able to work with partners, but we want to make sure that we ensure the security of our third-party partners by conducting security assessments before integration and regularly auditing them for compliance with security standards. We want to establish clear contractual security requirements with those third-party providers. So after testing comes operations. Once we get into production, we want to make sure that first and foremost, protect our data with encryption and other forms of protection. So safeguarding the data in transit and at rest by implementing strong and modern encryption protocols, so that making sure that we regularly review and update the encryption standards and protocols to make sure that they're up to date in, for example, like a TLS, to make sure that it's the current version and not something that has been retired recently, like 1.1. Next, we want to make sure that all API traffic goes through a gateway so that you can manage it, something like Google's Apogee or MuleSoft, so that we're able to monitor and control API traffic by using an API gateway. And this allows us to manage and secure all API traffic. By using this, we're able to implement rate limiting, throttling, API and geo whitelisting wherever possible to protect against DOS attacks and other threats. API key management is critical to secure the management of API keys and related processes by establishing policies for API key generation, distribution, and rotation. Use the cloud service provider's native or cloud agnostic tools to store and manage those API keys securely. And finally, in operations, make sure to use up-to-date and the most stringent controls available with authentication and authorization. Methods such as OAuth 2.0, OpenID Connect, and ensuring multi-factor authentication wherever possible. And again, I'm going through all this section right now. We're really talking about the framework. So if you think about all these different aspects of API security, how they all fit together, we start off by evaluating the current state. And moving on, next comes the API response, so that incident response and recovery is first and foremost. So to develop, make sure that there's a comprehensive incident response plan that's specific to API security incidents. And this ensures rapid detection, containment, and remediation of breaches. And we want to make sure to train the incident response team on the API-specific vulnerabilities and recovery procedures. Something that's relatively new is fraud detection, API fraud detection. And with advanced fraud detection systems, monitor and analyze API traffic for unusual patterns and potential fraud attempts. So that's where machine learning and AI comes into play. We use these models to adapt to new fraud tactics and enhance detection capabilities. And finally, governance. Basically, wrapping it all up with compliance and audits as a starting point. We want to ensure adherence to the regulatory and legal requirements by developing a compliance framework that includes regular audits and assessments. We encourage the use of automated tools that enable compliance monitoring and compliance reporting and continuous monitoring. Next, education and awareness. So it's important to foster this security-aware culture by developing and delivering training programs on API security best practices. We want to identify and train security champions within development teams to lead security initiatives. And finally, we want to keep on top of emerging threats and technologies, staying ahead of emerging threats and leveraging new technologies by regularly updating security practices and integrating threat intelligence into API security activities. It's important to conduct research and pilot new security solutions to enhance API protection. So basically, again, that's the framework that we evaluate the API program against to determine the current state assessment. What we do in parallel with that is to focus on establishing a preliminary API inventory. And this involves a manual process and automated tools to identify and catalog all east-west, which are internal, and north-south, the external APIs in use. And this gives a clear picture of what needs to be defended and monitored. So inside of these activities is going to be the documentation, where we ensure that all APIs are documented with detailed information, including endpoints, data flows, and security attributes. And again, it's part of that first assessment in the inventory of the framework. We do the preliminary to find out what we know about. Next up is a risk classification for all of the APIs that we've identified. You want to classify them based on their risk level, considering factors such as data sensitivity and exposure to external threats. And ongoing monitoring, continuous monitoring is set up, make sure that it's set up to detect changes in the API environment and update the inventory accordingly. And finally, with the API catalog, we want to establish a standard for the catalog that details the required and optional fields, including security metadata, the product owner, the risk rating, and other critical details of each API. So by the end of phase one, an organization will have a clear understanding of its current API security posture and maturity level across all of these domains. They'll have a detailed API inventory and a preliminary plan to address the identified gaps and enhance the overall API security. And this foundational work sets the stage for developing a complete set of recommendations that, when implemented, will lead to a secure API environment. The optimization phase is basically we're going to create a list of prioritized recommendations and an implementation roadmap. And based on the findings from phase one, Phase 2 focuses on developing this detailed set of recommendations to address the identified gaps and create a comprehensive roadmap for implementation. And this phase includes identifying and assisting in updating relevant policies and standards, completing the API catalog, and recommending appropriate tools and solutions. So, utilizing the detailed assessment from phase 1, we develop a set of recommendations that are tailored to the organization's needs, their security posture, and available resources. It's important that we keep all of these in consideration. And these recommendations are categorized based on urgency and impact and provide a clear roadmap to enhance the API security. And so activities in this part include a little out of sync here, excuse me. We're going to create that API security roadmap and develop the implementation plan where we take those recommendations by collaborating with stakeholders to review and finalize the prioritized and proposed recommendations. And with the implementation plan, for each recommendation, we want to include timelines, the responsible teams, and the required resources. And it's critical to have executive buy-in. So we present the prioritized recommendations and implementation plan to executive leadership to secure the approval and necessary funding. So the next step is we basically look at the policies and standards and decide all the relevant policies and standards get updated to reflect the new API security framework and the recommendations. This institutionalizes the changes that we're implementing, and it ensures the long-term compliance and security. We start off by reviewing all the policies and updating them, making sure to incorporate the new security controls, guidelines, and compliance requirements. And where necessary, we develop new policies where gaps have been identified, addressing specific API security needs, such as third-party API risk assessment and secure key management. And then finally, get the stakeholder engagement. We want to ensure the buy-in and alignment on the updated policies and standards. And finally, we want to develop training materials and communications plans to educate employees on these updated policies and standards. And then finally, we want to take that preliminary catalog that we started with and build a complete API catalog. So we're going to build on that, what we developed in phase 1, and this time we want to use automated discovery tools to find those undiscovered or zombie APIs, old versions of current APIs. And this catalog is going to provide a centralized repository of all APIs, including that detailed security metadata, risk ratings, and ownership information. So first and foremost, it's critical to implement a continuous monitoring and discovering solution. Tools like Salt Security and No Name, which has just been purchased by Akamai. If they're not already in place, we really need to deploy one of these tools to continuously identify and monitor APIs, allowing for real-time visibility. And we want to gather detailed information on each API, including the endpoints, data flows, security attributes, and ownership, and integrate these with tools so that the API catalog we integrate with the CI/CD pipeline and the monitoring solutions that we currently have. And then finally, we want to validate and verify to ensure the accuracy of the API catalog through regular automated scans and manual reviews. So basically, by the end of phase 2, the organization is going to have a set of actionable, prioritized recommendations with an implementation roadmap. They'll have updated policies and standards and procedures and a comprehensive, continuously updated API catalog. And this will provide the solid foundation for enhancing API security and ensuring ongoing compliance and regulatory requirements. So just wrapping it all up, basically this framework that we've developed, it really is, it's designed to enhance API security programs that we've developed it over years of experience and best practices developed through work with numerous clients. By addressing existing vulnerabilities and streamlining security practices and ensuring regulatory compliance, this can help organizations achieve a robust and resilient API security posture. And this phased approach, it provides a structured methodology for tackling API security challenges, from initial assessment and inventory to detailed recommendations and updated policies. And we feel that it serves as a blueprint for other organizations seeking to secure their API infrastructure. And by sharing our insights and methodology, we hope to contribute to the broader community's understanding and capability in managing API security effectively. And then finally, we welcome any opportunity to meet with you folks or any other organizations or individuals that are interested in learning more about how to implement this framework. We welcome the opportunity, and not necessarily on a professional basis, but we're very happy to at least start a conversation and provide a framework that you can use inside of your organization. So that's all I've got, and I'd be very happy to take any questions. Anybody? Please.
So, I'm familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? And if I understand, what it usually is doing is trying to look at different controls and then saying whether your organization needs to be kind of low, medium, or high on that control. In other words, for my organization, maybe I don't need that particular control, so I'd say I'm a low. But then there are other controls where this is very important to me and I'm a high. Do you take that into account as well with this kind of assessment, where you're, or is it just all assuming that they have to meet all of that criteria?
Yeah, good question. And I would say that it's really on an individual API basis, you really want to evaluate, just as you're saying, not just an organization where they're going to fit there, but the API itself. And that's part of the assessment, the inventory, and the risk rating. So those APIs that are deemed most critical and risky, you would definitely want to have the most monitoring applied to, have alerts ready to go, and have a response plan in place for each type of risk rating.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Good, and so that was basically my question. So it isn't one size fits all. It's, if you have lower risk, then maybe there's not as many controls, but if you have a higher risk API, then you have a lot more controls.
Absolutely, yeah. Anybody else? Yes, please, I'm sorry.
So is this sort of an engagement where Synopsys provides the people and you contract them to come in and analyze your network and your systems to do this? Or is this a set of tools that Synopsys provides and maybe some training that a company can then bring in-house, set up their own team and processes and execute on their network going forward?
Well, I would say this, that I am managing several, right now, as we speak, several API engagements that are very similar to this. And obviously, for business purposes, we'd love to come in and be the ones who do an engagement for like that. But one of the reasons that we're speaking to you today is really to highlight the necessity of API security. We really, I probably didn't do as good a job at the beginning of really shouting from the mountaintop that there's so much API vulnerabilities out there. And most organizations haven't identified this as the threat that it really is. So again, we're ready, willing, and able to speak to organizations about coming in and helping you out. but we're also at the same point, I would be happy to have a conversation with anybody to say, here's what you need to do. If you are able to do it in-house, great. But if you need an organization like Synopsys, we'll be happy to work with you on that. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Just a comment. I think it's, I like the method of going with inventory first. A lot of companies want to sell you detection tools, Band-Aid tools that are going to try and help you with the problem after the fact, but knowing what you have is very important.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And another thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, I'm on the services side of Synopsys. We have all these great tools that many of the organizations here use in their testing. So we're in services, we're kind of agnostic, and we just work with organizations, with companies, with what they're currently using. If they need recommendations, obviously we'll recommend our tools. But at the same time, we try to be as agnostic as possible. But the starting point has to be know what you have to protect and then work from there. Yeah, great point. Please.
My question is, have you developed a third-party vendor risk list in regards to the use of APIs with them?
I would say that an actual list of the third parties, no, but you know, the methodology for assigning risk to those third parties is how we do it. Not the individual. We don't have a list of those vendors out there, but we certainly you know, have a methodology for doing third-party risk management just for APIs.
Mm-hmm. And then another question.
Yep.
If you had to say where you found more problems, is it in the authentication or the zombie APIs?
I think that what is often the case is that until you get an auto-discovering tool, there's a lot of things out there that organizations aren't even aware of. Those zombies, but also there could be APIs that don't go through a gateway and that can be contacted directly. That's one thing. The other is that exposing too much data is one of the things that got one of our clients to reach out to us. They realized that rather than returning a small subset of the data, they returned a whole record, and that was publicly available. So that's the kind of things that we find out. Great. Any other questions? Yes, please.
You mentioned CI/CD, right? You know, like how much of this API discovery, all this framework addresses the APIs that are in development before they become problems in production? Can you talk briefly about it?
Well, I would say this, that we obviously, Synopsys is application security is what we do on the, not on the EDA side, but we, as part of that framework, and when we're evaluating how people are doing their application development, we want to make sure that all of the dynamic and static testing is done, and that integrated testing is done, so that we have the expertise to evaluate somebody's software development process and give recommendations about you might be missing something here, you might be missing something there. And when you have that full life cycle covered with not just the tools, but with secure code reviews and threat modeling and penetration testing, then you can have a very good understanding that you've done everything that you can testing-wise. And then once it gets out into production, then you're also monitoring it there for any vulnerabilities or for things happening at that point.
Thank you.
Certainly. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, I missed the first 10 minutes, so I might miss something, but this is kind of a tall order. You know, with the CrowdStrike problem, would your product or any other products that Synopsys has maybe help prevented some of the fallout from that, or help get systems back up sooner?
I wouldn't say that's per se, but I think one of the things that the CrowdStrike issue was really the integrative testing, that they didn't do their due diligence and went live with an update that wasn't fully tested, and that's something that I don't think any tool is going to capture. That's really more of a process. Yep, certainly. Yes?
You mentioned API gateways. Are you also testing the gateways as well as the API on the application APIs?
Well, in the sense that we really want to make sure that all traffic goes through a gateway so that it's managed. And traffic that doesn't go through the gateway, it can just be anywhere. By going through a gateway, you have the control. You can have a WAF in front of it. You can apply, you can throttle it, have whitelisting, geolocation, things of that nature, so that you want to make sure that all traffic goes through the gateway. Yep. Anybody else? Well, if nobody else, I would turn it over to somebody from here, from ISSA. And if not, I'll say thank you very much for your time and attention. I really appreciate you. Thank you.